Take a look at this common argument used by ex-Mormons. They say, let's suppose Native Americans are the descendants of Lamanites, like the Book of Mormon says. If that were true, we would expect to find DNA in modern Native Americans that originates from ancient Israel. But scientific discoveries show instead they originate from East Asia. Thus, the DNA evidence shows that the Book of Mormon is false. Well, in this video, we're going to examine this argument very closely and see if it has any merit. This argument is set up to prove the Book of Mormon false by way of contradiction. And it does this by assuming a few things at the beginning and showing that holding those assumptions all together actually result in a contradiction, meaning those assumptions can't all be true. So if we were to write it out carefully, it would look something like this. First, we have to assume three things. 1, that Lamanite DNA originates from ancient Israel. 2, that Native Americans are descendants of the Lamanites. And 3, ancestral origins can be scientifically determined by DNA analysis. Then a contradiction comes into play, because DNA analysis suggests Native American origins are primarily from East Asia. Therefore, that at least one of the following must be false. Either the Native Americans are not descendants of the Lamanites, which is the one the anti-Mormons choose to believe is false. 2, Lamanite DNA does not originate from ancient Israel. Or 3, ancestral origins cannot be scientifically determined by DNA analysis. So let's look at each one in isolation to determine which one is most likely to be false. Now, it's important that we look at each one in isolation and not assume the other two, lest we be guilty of circular logic. First, Native Americans are descendants of the Lamanites. If we take this in isolation, the answer is, who knows? Where did the Lamanites come from? We're not assuming that they originate from ancient Israel. We're not assuming anything. We just are saying there's some group called the Lamanites that the Native Americans are descendants of. So in isolation, you can't really say anything about the truthfulness of this statement. So the big question mark goes there. How about the next one? Lamanite DNA originates from ancient Israel. Without knowing the source of the DNA of the families that populated the populations in the Book of Mormon, again, this one in isolation is really hard to know. What about the last one? Ancestral origins can be scientifically determined by DNA analysis. Without assuming the other two, can we make any statements about the truthfulness about this claim? Well, we can, because scientifically speaking, we know it's not always possible to know ancestral origins from DNA.
There's still a possibility that when you inherited this marker, you got it not from somebody who was South Asian, but from somebody who was in some completely different group that also happened to have that marker.
The more generations removed an ancestor is, the more likely they won't be represented in your DNA at all.
So, we need to reject the one that is the most likely false, meaning the one that we know is false. The irony of this is that if anyone claims that DNA evidence proves the Book of Mormon false, they're actually going against science. They're being anti-science, because scientifically speaking, we know things like genetic drift, founder effect, and bottlenecking are all reasons why we wouldn't be able to tell the ancestral origins of a people by their DNA.
But because of random chance, it disappears from the population. You have so many alleles will have disappeared because you have such a small population of blues here, and also because you have a small population, you're likely to have even more genetic drift.
Now, I should probably mention something that many of you are probably about to type in the comments, and that is the statement in the introduction of the Book of Mormon in 1981 to 2006 that said in 1981 that the Lamanites are the principal ancestors of the American Indians, and was updated in 2006 to say that the Lamanites are among the ancestors of the American Indians. It should be noted that rejecting that third premise is actually a lot more difficult if the statement says that they are the principal ancestors of the Native Americans, which is probably why the introduction was changed to reflect updated knowledge. Because in light of this new information about DNA analysis, it's probably more likely that there were a lot more other people that contributed to the Native Americans' DNA today than just the Lamanites. So this is just further evidence that the church is actually following the science when it gives us deeper understanding of truth. Of all the arguments against the Book of Mormon, this is one of the biggest. But just like other arguments below the surface, this one is actually pretty weak. Just like the argument about anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. In fact, I think the arguments about anachronisms in the Book of Mormon are actually very wrong. But to find out why I think that, you're going to have to check out the next video.